We're very, very loyal viewers.
Cheer, cheer.
Recommended this movie to me, or to us, but I'm sort of the girl who ends up with all the costume stuff, so ended up with me. So Restoration, thank you, Matt, for recommending it. This is a 1995 movie. It isn't actually an American movie, but from a British book from a couple of years earlier. And I had some problems to thinking of what to say about it because it's actually just good. And that makes the review really hard because it's just good. The movie is set in the 1660s during the Restoration period in England, which is sort of a very weird period for Americans to make a movie about because I'm Dutch and we don't even get this period in our history books at school. I mean, Americans are not going to be... Do you even know this period? Why make a movie about it? I'm guessing they made a movie because they had a good book. And I do think it's a good book. They had a lot of research done and this movie looks so good and so authentic. It looks exactly like the paintings. The people look exactly like the paintings, the way they wear stuff and the things they have. There's a lot of known about the 1660s historically, but this film actually went to the right people to ask and got the answers. They actually got an Oscar for the sets and one for the costumes. So 2 Oscars. I'll check again if I did that right. But so yeah, that should tell you a lot. This is a beautiful movie to watch. So as such, highly recommend it. And thank you, Matt, for recommending it. But as I know quite a bit about history, British history, particular Dutch history, of course, but this is British history, and this period, Restoration period, is kind of a yes, it has great looks, but not much happens that is actually really interesting. It's the Great Fire of London, so they have the king, and they have a Great Fire of London, and they have the Renaissance. Let's start with the Renaissance. The Renaissance in England, in Europe, it's been going for many years, but in England, it actually hits England like a ton of bricks in 1600-ish. Just after Elizabeth I, who was purely a medieval queen. Yes, she had some stuff, but the idea of a Renaissance, of all these new things, didn't hit England until 1600. So by 1660s, yeah, we're in the middle of the British Renaissance, call it that, and it's hitting all the new things that are coming from Europe that have been doing Renaissancing for 200 years already, are hitting England like pelting it with new ideas and new ideas about the world, the astronomy, architecture, how you're supposed to live, how you're supposed to do your king, do things, medicine. And medicine is what this movie is about. Our main character, Robert Merivel, is a young doctor, still studying when you start. The interesting thing about him is that he is actually in medieval times. That's the difference between the Renaissance and the medieval times. Is in the medieval times, if you're a baker, your father is a baker, you become a baker, and your son becomes a baker, and his son becomes a baker. This Merivel's father is a glover. He makes gloves, but he sends his son to a school to become a doctor. And that is very modern in 1660s. That's pretty modern. One of the things about this film is it's absolutely full of Easter eggs, of historical Easter eggs. And there's a little Easter egg here because the father Glover, Shakespeare's father was a glover. So that's one of those Easter eggs. It's the one that's unrelated, but most of the other ones are actually historically in the right place, because of course Shakespeare is about 100 years earlier than this. But still, this idea of sending your son to do something else than you did, sends him to be a doctor. He's and you get to see his class, his anatomy lesson, which is another one of those Easter eggs. The anatomy lessons, a lot of Dutch painters in the 17th century did that as a big painting of the anatomy lesson. And they do one here. And if you're going to watch the movie, be aware it's all props, because it looks disgusting, because they are doing medicine, but they have no clue about anything. They have no clue about simple things like you don't touch wounds with dirty hands. But that's the point. They are in a period where they want to start learning things, they want to start knowing things, but they don't check shit. And they're almost aware of it. The film reads as a greatest hits of the 1660s. So we have the king and the fire, and then they even include Christopher Wren's rebuilding of London before it happened, because there's a scene where Merivel meets the king, and there's this enormous mock-up of an entire city there, and those are Sir Christopher Wren's designs, which were actually, I think they were actually started after the fire of London, but in the film the fire of London happens later. But they wanted to show it off anyway. But it shows that the king is interested in architecture, and he shows him a telescope, so he shows that the king is interested in astronomy, all those greatest hits of the 1660s. Couple of criticisms in the way, and that's not really, one of them is not really the film's fault. The film is from 1995, and in the 70s, 80s, and until mid-90s, there was a consensus that any time before 1800, people lived in dirt and in the cities and anywhere else, and there was mud, and it was everything, and poor people were dirty. And so this film does that too, unfortunately. We now know that that's not true. And if you think about it, it cannot be true, because you live in mud, you're going to die of pneumonia. And so it's not true, but this movie does it. And like I said, it's not this movie's fault. It was just the fashion of the time of how to depict this. The other one is that this stuff is so perfect, other than this little thing, on the looks, that when they make a mistake, you notice very much. And one of the mistakes they make is that he, as the son of a glover who has now become a doctor, he has a modern 1660s wig. And the way he treats the thing, I don't think that's how you would... These things would have been very expensive. It would have been one of... it would have been the most expensive thing he owned. He would not have been throwing it around. That's one. Two is that underneath wigs, in the time they had wigs, you didn't have a 1995 hairdo like Robert Downey Jr. has when he takes it off. You would just mow it off and let it grow out a little bit and mow it off again. So it wouldn't be a nice haircut, no matter what. Sorry. I mean... love Robert Downey Jr., but when he takes off his wig, he has a normal haircut. So the people who don't wear the wigs in this movie, which is the Quaker and the servants, they have hair as they would have had. I mean, the Quaker would have very unpretentious hair, but grown out. It would have been shoulder length for the men. Women never cut their hair, any period. Some coiffing, but no serious cutting. So men would have it at shoulder length, and yes, indeed, they do. And servants, and you might even grow it out a little bit too much, and then that's neither here nor there. But on the whole, so that's fine. But the moment they have the wigs, when they have the wigs on, oh my God! You just put a painting filter over it and stick it on the wall. It's perfect. Yeah, the other glaring one is that it is 1995 when they made this movie in England at the time, and still, I believe, brides wear a little crown. I don't know where this tradition came from, but it exists. So there is, in the film, there is a scene of Merivel marrying somebody. It's complicated, but in the 1660s, people didn't wear crowns. Not even the king and queen wore crowns. If you see a portrait of the king or queen, they have the wig on and the crown sitting on a table next to them, or they're just holding the globe and the staff, and not, they don't do anything with the crown, especially the ladies. So in the wedding scene, because it's 1995, the girl does wear a crown thing, and
tiara.
Yeah, I know it's. No, it wasn't more of a crown thing than a tiara, because a tiara is a very specific crown thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Crown is full.
Yeah, I know. So, but it was because they couldn't fit it right on the wig, because it doesn't belong on the wig. There's actually no room in the fashion on the wig to have a crown type thing. So that's why, and so that was sort of okay. It's 1995. Well, I mean, that's like two, 3 mistakes. We'll live, okay. In a other than that, it is those two Oscars are worth. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. I found the Oscars. Restoration won the Academy Award for Best Art Direction, Set Direction.
Yeah, this is for the sets.
Yes, this is a man called Eugenio Zanetti. And the other one is Best Costume Design for James Acheson.
Yeah, the looks. Just looking at this movie will give you a greatest hits of the 1660s, and you don't even talk about the story. You haven't even said anything about the story yet, but I think the story is actually not that important, and the story is of Robert Merivel sort of waving his way through life. He's not very decisive. He's asking questions because he's a Renaissance man in that sense that he. I wrote it down. It's too early to have any choices, but it's late enough to want them, and to have questions. Yeah, it's too early to actually get any answers. It's going to be 100 or 200 years before a lot of the questions he asked will get answers. But he's Renaissance enough to ask the questions, but he's not modern enough to understand any of the answers if they came to him. One of the interesting things that happens in his life, because he is not Quaker, but his friend is, and because of events that happen, he sort of falls out of favor with everybody, and he can only go to his Quaker friend, and his Quaker friend is running a hospital for people who are completely, in the time, would have been considered undesirable. Basically, it's a mental hospital. That's what, when we see it, you recognize that's what it is. There are mental patients there, and they have no way at all to deal with them, understand them, get anything done with them. And that's where Merivel rolls into. And the one good quality that Merivel has is that he has an instinctual feel for things. And one of the things he starts is giving them music therapy, or starts playing music to them, make them dance, see if that helps. It's a start of something. I think it's a little bit too modern in 1660s, but it's a nice. It's more of a illustration. The entire film is more of illustrations of of elements of the time and also of our own time, because definitely the 1995 us is a player in this thing, but it is a beautiful postcard. This is a postcard, and that's why I think that the story matters less. There's events and recurring events, and they do all that film stuff that you show something at the beginning, it comes back at the end. They show all of that. That's not an issue. It's just that's not what it's about. It is a mood board, if you like. One off point is that I do think it's too male centric, but it's 1995, so duh. The other thing is that unless you have something about the movie in the peanut gallery,
yeah.
She has one more.
Yeah, I just realized I have a question that I didn't know I had. So, one thing about the movie. The American actors play most of the parts.
This is an American movie that happens to be filmed in Britain, in England, with an English story, a book written by a good author. I thought at first she was an historian, but she's not. She studied writing a lot, and then I think she's interested in history because it's all correct. From what I know, it all fits and it's all correct. The main cast is American, but the supporting cast is British. So the Quaker friend is David Thewlis, who you may know as Remus Lupin in Harry Potter. And before he got famous, Ian McKellen plays the butler in the big house. That's before he became famous.
So how...
And Hugh Grant is in it.
Yeah, I saw that. A small role.
But that's the British people, because they did film in England.
How well do you rate the performance of the American actors portraying Brits?
There's only 2 American actors actually, because it's Meg Ryan, as the girl in the mental home, and Robert Downey Jr. as Merivel. Now, Robert Downey Jr. can do an English accent very well, and he did it very well here.
And Sam Neill?
Sam Neill is Australian, and he can do anything.
Oh, sure. Okay, gotcha.
And he's almost a lookalike for the king, because I'm going to go back to the king now. This is not about the king, but the restoration period is called Restoration because it's the restoration of the monarchy back to England after the Cromwell Commonwealth period. And the thing about Merivel and the way he is and how his position is and how the king is has all to do with British history. All over the place. That's why I want to talk a little bit about British history, because that's the one thing they don't do in this movie. They don't explain anything on why this stuff is the way it is. Why is he a doctor? Why is that a new profession? What's going on? Why is the king the way he is? Because that king is weird. And I'll explain. England, if you take an overview of English history, they have been, since Rome left in 400, been fighting amongst each other for a millennia and a half. First smaller kingdoms, then bigger kingdoms, fighting for the chance to be the top dog. And even with William the Conqueror, he was just another big top dog that killed another top dog and became top dog. And then his type became top dog. It's the same. By the time you get to Henry VIII, they've had some really bad civil war called the War of the Roses, from people who know that. It was so bad that people collectively said, we do not want another civil war, because it was a civil war. War of the Roses was a civil war of the upper class. But like half or more got killed. It was devastating. So when Henry VIII became king, his job was to make sure that he had a son to carry on. Now, for the people who don't know her history, they know it didn't go that easily. He actually first he had a girl, and then he had no more, so he had to get rid of his wife, but he couldn't because he actually acquired her from his brother who died by papal dispensation, and now he wanted another papal dispensation to get a divorce, and the Pope said, yeah, no, I did that already, so he couldn't kill her, so he got rid of the church, and this is the salient point. He got rid of the church in England, so there's no more papal control. He became the grand person of the church, and founded the Church of England, which was very much Catholic in shape, except it had no church to do. With that, he dissolved the monasteries, and that's a phrase that people who know their history know what it means. They'll explain. He closed every single monastery that was out there, and because these monasteries now went away, why is that important? A lot of Catholics going home. Monasteries, apart from doing church stuff, did all the doctor stuff. If you were sick, you go to a monastery. There would be a brother there to help you. If you were old, you go to a monastery, and they have something for you. If you was anything. And by the time this happened in the 1540s, by the time Merivel's time runs up, they have been trying to rebuild the medical profession from scratch, from nothing, and that's why Merivel is a doctor, because they're almost getting that far. But they still, even in the story itself, he still has to invent what a doctor is and what he does. Basically, at some point, he just sets up shop and says, okay, you give me money and I'll give you medicine. I'll organize medicine or something like that. Because it doesn't exist yet. It's like 120 years later. It's still, they haven't crawled back from this. And that's interesting. If you know that, that's interesting. And then you have the king. Now, the king, after Elizabeth died in 1604, I believe, her cousin, they were related somehow, who was also James, who was also King of Scotland, became King of United.
Because he was the heir to the throne of England, but he was already King of Scotland. Finally, Scotland and England became one.
Yeah. Yeah, and he was. Elizabeth had left an Anglican Protestant country behind. James perpetuated that, and then they had Charles number 1. Now Charles number 1 forgot that he lives in the Renaissance and thought he lived in 11 something or other, and started to go, I'm the anointed king and you had better do what I want, and you know what, this is the Renaissance, let's not do that anymore. So other people came along and said, well, if you don't persist, we will stop you, and that ended happening with a war and cutting off the head of the king. This king had a son, also named Charles. The peanut gallery knows where I'm going with this. Once Charles number 1 was no more, they had a brief period of the Cromwell time. I'll put in dates if you want to see that. They tried to become a republic. Basically, TLDRs, they tried to become a republic, but it didn't work out. And at the end of that period, they sort of went, who are we going to call back? Didn't Charles number 1 have a son? Also called Charles. You come.
Knock, knock.
Knock, knock. Charles, this Charles, this king, in this story, is the Charles number 2. Charles number 2 had, people don't talk about that sort of thing actually, but basically he had 3 things that he had to do in order not to, he had to not make war, stay Protestant, or just Anglican Protestant, and have a son. He could only do two out of these.
Oh no.
He married Katharine of Braganza, which was a great match. She's from the Portuguese house, which Portugal was pretty big at the time. The problem is that this is early. People don't realize what inbreeding does. Katharine of Braganza could not have a baby, and nobody knew. And he was married to her, to a princess of a really strong house. He couldn't divorce her. So he did the only thing that he could do. I mean, this is not her fault either. It is not his fault, this is not her fault. But he had to show very clearly that this is not his fault. So he had mistresses of the wazoo and had the sons and daughters and lots with everybody. And that's where Merivel rolls in. Because by the time he is actually at court and the king has talked to him, then go watch the movie if you want to see that part. These mistresses, and this is historical, these mistresses were housed in different parts of the palace, far away from each other and from Katharine of Braganza, because these people don't go together. So very often the king had an extra mistress that he would like to stash somewhere, but where do you stash it? Oh, maybe in Merivel's house. But then how could you do that without him being married to her? So they do that. The thing is, this ridiculous situation is all not actually historical. The events in the thing is, of course, not historical, but the circumstances are all historical. And that's what makes this movie a good movie. Is if you know a little bit about history, even if you know not only that bit or that bit, you can, hey, that's there. Because they do the plague. Everybody's heard about the plague and the fire of 1666. They do all that. He's always right at the thick of these things. So he meets the Quakers that are the type that go to the States shortly after. He meets the king. He does it's the greatest hits of 1660s. That's what it is, and I loved it. Peanuts.
Yeah, I was, when you started about restoration, I was wondering how they dealt with the overthrowing of royalty and the Cromwell thing that had just happened. They kind of
nobody says anything.
Skip over it.
That's why I'm telling it here, because the film doesn't tell you anything. They assume that you know. You're dropped in 1666 or a couple of years earlier, and you get a snapshot of the time for a couple of years, and then you get out of there. That's it. Nobody talks about it because people are trying to forget. They're trying to do as little as possible while making the world prettier. That's the time. That's why I'm saying this is a really weird time to have a movie about, because it's one of those where the point is that nothing happens. That's the point of this time. There's nothing happens other than these plague and the fire. Those are the main actual events of the time. Are the plague, and that was ongoing, and the fire. That's it. And the rest is all scenery. And that's my opinion, I think. And enjoy this movie, and I'm sticking to it.